SoundCartel.
Government support for business owners and employees is a moving feast as it tries to keep up with the rollercoaster trajectory of the pandemic. And as rules around Jobkeeper continue to change, it's so important to be aware of what's new and with the latest extension, if indeed you're eligible. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Many have described it as a lifeline to thousands of businesses that would otherwise have sunk without a trace. But no, the federal government has ridden to the rescue. In July, it announced an extension of the Jobkeeper payment scheme, taking it out to March 2021 and bringing a collective sigh of relief from businesses struggling to survive COVID. Now, this month, further adjustments have been announced as a result of the second wave of infections in Victoria, plus the persuasive pleas of those who argued that still more was needed to be done. So where does that leave us all now? Michael Jones is Superannuation and Business Advisory Partner with Mazars. He tells Heather Dawson that the latest changes relate to both business and employee eligibility and to the payment rates. Let's start with business eligibility.
Right, so from 28 September 2020, businesses seeking to claim Jobkeeper payments will be required to reassess their eligibility for the extension with reference to their actual turnover in the September quarter. So in the past, like under the current scheme, if they qualified in March, that's it. They didn't have to requalify. Now with the extension, they're going to have to look at their actual turnover in the September quarter 2020. And what they need to do is to demonstrate that they've met the relevant decline in turnover test in that quarter in order then to be eligible for Jobkeeper from September through to the 3rd of January. And then you've got a next quarter. So that period from the 4th of January to the 28th of March, the businesses will need to again demonstrate they've met the relevant decline in turnover test during the December quarter, if you see what I mean. An important change, which was announced on the 7th of August, is that we don't have to test eligibility for the June quarter. Now, this is a really sensible modification because many Victorian businesses actually started improving in June and then suffered a subsequent decline with the second wave. And so if June was included, it would knock out many people that should be getting assistance. So it's a good move.
Okay. Remind us, Michael, what is the required decline in turnover? Okay,
so there's 3 tests for decline in turnover. The most common one for our audience is that you need to have suffered a 30% fall in turnover, and that applies if your turnover is $1 billion or less. Now, if your turnover is more than $1 billion, you have to suffer a 50% decline in turnover. And if you're a registered charity, you have to suffer a 15% decline in turnover.
Okay. Now, what changes have been made to the Jobkeeper payment rate, Michael?
Okay, so the Jobkeeper payment rate is going to be progressively reduced over the next 2 quarters in this new extended period. And also, the payments were made at 2 separate rates, and the rates will depend on whether the employee worked either more or less than 20 hours a week, okay? There's a new sort of test. So in the December quarter, the payment rate will be $1,200 per fortnight for those that have worked more than 20 hours a week on average. And it'll be $750 per fortnight for those who have worked less than 20 hours a week on average. Then in the next quarter, the March quarter, there'll be a further reduction, and that'll be down to $1,000 a fortnight if you've worked 20 hours or more, and $650 a fortnight for those worked less than 20 hours a week.
Now, what if you're self-employed, though?
If you're self-employed, the same rate applies. So that means if you're self-employed and actively engaged in the business for more than 20 hours a week, that rate applies, and less than 20 hours a week, that rate applies. So it's the same test for the self-employed.
Okay. Now, tell us about changes to employee eligibility.
Well, the reference date for assessing which employees are eligible for the JobKeeper payment is now 1 July 2020. And that change took effect from the 3rd of August 2020. So the reference period, right, it relates to employees and it looks at the hours they worked to determine the tier of payment that'll be applicable for the 2 fortnightly pay periods. And you might be an eligible employee at March and also an eligible employee in July, and you're able to take the period with the higher number of hours of either of those two if you were eligible in both those dates. Now, the important thing here is that JobKeeper was previously only available to employees, and when I say employees, I'm including long-term casual employees that were engaged by the employer on 1 March 2020. So now that we've got a new employment date of 1 July 2020, it increases the range of employees that are eligible for both the existing scheme and the extended scheme.
Now, Michael, you said the new eligibility applied from the 3rd of August. So what should employers be doing now?
Well, because the JobKeeper payment continues to remain open to new recipients, provided, they meet the eligibility requirements, then if you think you have employees and long-term casual employees that meet the new criteria, you can provide them with a nomination form and enrol these new employees into the current JobKeeper scheme. And to do that, you'll have to pay these employees a minimum of $1,500 a fortnight. More detail, will emerge as legislation and other material is released. However, I think it's relevant, to get started acting on these changes now, assuming they're already in effect as we speak.
Michael, do you think many businesses will qualify?
I think the changes will be essential, for many struggling businesses to keep on going. And as I said, it was helpful the government listened and made modifications to remove the June quarter from the eligibility test. The important thing is, for here in Victoria, it's expected that almost 80% of all the increased payments will be coming into the Victorian businesses and employees. And they say that around 4 million Australians will be receiving JobKeeper by the end of September, and that'll reduce down to 2.24 million in December, and then 1.75 million in the March quarter. That's what they're saying, but of course it's a dynamic situation and the circumstances could easily change.
Indeed. So what happens next then?
Well, I think it's really important for businesses to be well informed about government assistance in these difficult times. So the government designed the JobKeeper program so that it could be adjusted to respond to the changing and unpredictable economic conditions. And to their credit, that's exactly what has happened, and they were able to respond quickly by making these announcements. But the fact is, there'll be a myriad of situations that don't quite fit the rules as announced. For example, how do you calculate that 20 hours per week for eligible business participants? And how do you apply that one-in, all-in rule for new employees? Things like that. It's hoped that detailed guidance will be available by the beginning of September. So what I say to everyone is to stay tuned in so they're informed of the latest details.
That was Mazars, Superannuation and Business Advisory Partner, Michael Jones. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.